Thank you, Mr. President. I commend the People's Republic of China for organizing this important meeting. Today, Africa is moving forward with its own agenda of progress, peace, and prosperity. Across the continent, countries are growing and addressing complex structural challenges in line with the African Union's Agenda 2063. Civil society, communities, and governments are working together as never before. The United Nations is fully committed to supporting these efforts, and important progress has already been made in implementing the joint UN-AU framework for enhanced partnership in peace and security, and the AU-UN framework on implementation of Agenda 2063 and Agenda 2030. However, the continent continues to face vulnerabilities that threaten its peace and security, hinder its economic development, and undermine human rights and the rule of law. Mr. President, among those threats is that of terrorism and violent extremism, which continues to grow in various parts of the continent, despite our efforts to prevent and counter it at the national, regional, and international levels. Al-Shabaab continues to pose the most persistent threat to security in Somalia and East Africa, despite the intensified military operations against it in recent years. ISIL and al-Qaeda affiliates are collaborating with each other to undertake increasingly sophisticated attacks in West Africa, especially in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. ISIL also continues to operate in Libya despite recent setbacks, and it is restructuring and empowering its affiliates in Eastern, Southern, and Central Africa. In the Sahel and the Lake Chad Basin, the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, Boko Haram, and its splinter faction, the Islamic State's West Africa province, continue to terrorize local populations and attack security forces. I'd like to take this opportunity to remember the tens of thousands of African victims of terrorism and to express my solidarity with the affected governments and people. Terrorism causes deep, lasting scars, and victims and survivors need not only protection, but a chance to heal through justice and support for rebuilding their lives. We know that women bear a disproportionate burden of this violence, including through sexual slavery. Just as misogyny is at the heart of so many terrorist groups' strategies, so must women be at the center of our responses. Mr. President, the high-level regional conference on preventing and countering violent extremism, which the United Nations co-organized with the government of Kenya in Nairobi last July, has reinvigorated our common efforts to understand and address terrorism in Africa. As the Secretary General has stated, we cannot address terrorism without addressing underlying factors. The threat of terrorism is often a consequence of development, humanitarian, human rights, and security challenges that terrorist groups seek to exploit. Security and military solutions are thus not sufficient. We must address poverty, weak governance, intercommunal tensions, gender inequality, youth unemployment, illicit activities such as trafficking in weapons and people, and the use of new technologies and social media to recruit, inflame, and incite. We also need to better understand the specific threat and priority needs of each country and sub-region. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Comprehensive and inclusive all-of-government and all-of-society approaches are essential. As terrorism has no borders, preventing and combating it requires strong multilateral cooperation. The United Nations remains committed to bringing member states together to share counterterrorism best practices, expertise, and resources. The United Nations is working closely with African organizations and member states to promote a comprehensive and balanced implementation of the global counterterrorism strategy. We supported the development of regional counterterrorism strategies in the Sahel, Central and Southern Africa, and we are supporting the implementation